Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the cluttered world of ancient Rome, where luxury comes in unexpected forms, like a tongue. Not yours, thankfully. We're talking flamingo tongues. Yes, the Romans really did consider that blushing bird's tongue to be the height of culinary chic. You wake in a dim, single-room insula apartment, somewhere in the Subura district. The plaster walls are cracked, stained with centuries of soot and cooking smoke. A shaft of pale sunlight slips through the shutter slats. You hear it before you smell it. The sizzle of olive oil and the shuffle of sandals from the bakery below. Your mattress is stuffed with straw that somehow manages to poke through the linen in all the wrong places. But hey, at least it's your straw. You swing your legs over the edge and wince as your foot finds a cool, damp patch on the floor. Was it spilled water? Or something less explainable? No time to investigate. Outside, Rome hums like a beehive cranked up before dawn. You pull on your tunic, wrinkled, of course, because ironing isn't a thing yet, and tie your belt with more hope than precision. Down 5 narrow flights of stone stairs, dodging your neighbor's laundry and someone's discarded fish bones, you emerge into the noisy artery of a Roman street. It's already pulsing with people. Mule carts, shouting vendors, and the occasional stray dog dart past as you blend into the current. Your nose leads you toward the Forum Boreum, the old cattle market. But this morning, it's all about vegetables, garum, and gossip. The air smells like a confusing argument between fresh thyme, old goat, and boiling fish sauce. Someone tries to sell you a fig that's already halfway to wine. Someone else shouts about oysters. And over by the fountain, a man in expensive sandals argues, loudly, about whether his flamingo supplier is late again. You pause. Flamingo. Yes, flamingo. The man continues, complaining that last night's banquet was a culinary disaster because there were only 4 tongues on the platter instead of 5. Complete disgrace. You blink slowly. You haven't even had breakfast yet. As you dodge a runaway melon, your attention drifts to the marble statues watching from above, imperial eyes frozen in stone, gazing down on all this mess. Somewhere in those stares is the knowledge that this city runs on spectacle. If people aren't being entertained, fed, or flattered, someone's doing it wrong. And speaking of spectacle, you're about to witness what fine dining really meant in ancient Rome. Because flamingo tongues? They're just the beginning. Historians still argue whether flamingo tongues were truly common among the upper class or just a rare novelty for show-off senators. But in Roman satire and letters, they appear often enough to make you wonder just how many flamingos were nervously keeping their beaks shut around patrician kitchens. As you weave through the morning bustle, a trio of children dash past, laughing, one wearing a cabbage leaf as a hat. You think about breakfast. Your stomach growls. But you're not reaching for a flamingo. You're heading toward a simpler fare, maybe a piece of crusty bread, if there's any left from yesterday, and a bit of soft cheese wrapped in fig leaves. As you sit on a worn stone step, you watch the dance of Roman daily life. Someone's selling clay lamps. Another offers honey cakes shaped like fish. A woman yells at a pickpocket, who scampers away with a bag of pine nuts. You breathe in the smells again. A little burnt, a little sweet, a lot chaotic. And yet, this is the capital of the known world. A city where taste buds ruled empires, if only for a dinner or two. Where flamingos weren't just birds, they were status, prestige. A way to say, look how absurdly rich I am. I fed you something that required a full bird for a mouthful. Even now, you still feel half asleep, wrapped in a fog of city smells and secondhand sandals. But your day's just beginning. And tonight, if you play your cards right, you might just crash a party where tongues, yes, actual tongues, are the talk of the table. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing who's drifting off from where in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You brush crumbs from your lap and rise again, heading deeper into the city, toward the laughter, the fire smoke, and the strange, savory promise of flamingos. You shuffle forward with the crowd, drawn by the scent of something charred, something salty, something just a little too fishy to be breakfast. The Forum Boreum surrounds you like a living amphitheater of voices, gestures, and smells. This isn't just a market. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of a group chat, a Craigslist ad, and a reality cooking show rolled into one long colonnaded square. Vendors lean over their worn stalls, shouting prices and flexing their sales pitches like gladiators of gastronomy. One man offers spice dates wrapped in fig leaves. Another holds up a glistening eel, its dead eyes as vacant as your motivation on a Monday morning. A woman ladles ladanum-scented wine from a clay jug into tiny taste cups. Yes, it's fermented. Yes, it's before noon. And no, she doesn't care. You dodge a goat. An actual goat, its horns decorated with dyed ribbons and a little bronze bell around its neck. You're pretty sure that bell is worth more than your sandals. Over by a cracked stone basin, once part of a temple, now a makeshift fish counter, you hear the squelch of garum being poured into a clay jug. Garum, Rome's fermented fish sauce, brewed by leaving anchovies and other bits of sea creatures to rot in salt under the sun. The result? A thick, golden brown liquid that smells like old socks and power. Roman chefs dribble it on everything. Oysters, lentils, even fruit. You sidle up beside a vendor selling wax tablets and overhear a particularly loud conversation between two men in togas. They're mid-argument, debating the relative merits of flamingo tongue versus stork liver. One of them insists the flamingo has a subtle tang and a texture that sings. Though how a tongue sings is beyond you. You glance at the tablet seller, who shrugs and says, "They say Apicius would boil the tongues in spiced wine until they curled like petals." Apicius. The name rings a bell. Marcus Gavius Apicius, the original celebrity chef of Rome. He didn't invent flamingo tongue cuisine, but he did write it down, or at least inspired the cookbook that did. His recipes call for things like sow's womb, sea urchin custard, and yes, flamingo. Just the tongue, please. The rest? Decorative. Historians still argue whether Apicius was a real author or a legendary amalgam of Rome's most extravagant foodies. But one thing's clear. His recipes weren't for the faint of palate, or stomach, or budget. A baker nearby offers you a crescent-shaped loaf, warm, dusted with poppy seeds, and whispering sweet, carby promises. You accept. And as you nibble, you pass a painted stall with live hens in cages and a strange assortment of birds tethered to perches. Peacocks, swans, and yes, behind a silk-covered shade, one pale pink flamingo. Its long neck arcs like a question mark as it eyes you back, blinking slowly, like it knows its tongue might be dinner. There's something ridiculous and sad about the sight. The bird, with its elegant feathers and awkward gait, stands on one leg like it's pretending to meditate. A young boy stands nearby holding a feed bowl and trying to explain, in too serious Latin, that the flamingos are not for pets. They are for senators. You wonder briefly if that flamingo dreams of flying. Then again, maybe it dreams of not being an appetizer. You wander deeper into the market, past spice sellers grinding cinnamon bark with polished stones, past a man offering imported pepper as fine as snow, and past a group of women tasting olives with the concentration of wine critics. One spits hers out and mutters, "Too Gallic." You spot a patrician woman surrounded by servants. She points at items without speaking, her hands moving with the grace of someone used to being obeyed. In her basket, rose petals, dates, a jar of honey, and something wrapped tightly in cloth, possibly a tongue or two. A boy selling meat skewers calls to you. "Lamb," he says. "Maybe, probably." You shake your head. You're still digesting the idea of tongue as delicacy, though part of you wants to try it, just to say you did. Flamingo tongues, after all, weren't everyday food. They were signals. Wealth, rank, success. They whispered, "I can afford to waste 90% of a bird for the one part you've never tasted." It wasn't about hunger. It was about theater. About indulgence so unapologetic it became art. You glance back at the pink bird again. It ruffles its feathers, turns its head, and promptly poops on a marble tile. Well, so much for elegance. Still, you can't help but feel caught in the weird spell of Rome. A place where slaves carry water in silver jugs, where cooks train for years to make jellyfish taste tolerable, and where tongues, whether flamingo or human, hold far more power than reason should allow. You find a quiet spot near the edge of the market, watching the chaos swirl around you like a stew of ambition, appetite, and absurdity. Somewhere nearby, a boy plays a reed flute. Somewhere else, someone drops a wine jug and curses in Greek. And for just a moment, as the breeze picks up and carries the smell of roasted garlic and salted fish your way, you forget the strangeness. You forget the cost. You only feel the heat, the sound, the vibrant, messy heartbeat of a city that never stops feasting. You turn away from the hum of the market, trailing behind a pair of senators in deep discussion. Their cloaks swirl like theatrical curtains, and their hands move as dramatically as their voices rise. You don't mean to eavesdrop. It's just that they're talking at the volume of men who've never heard of indoor voices. They're not discussing politics, not taxes or laws or wars. No, these two esteemed members of Rome's elite are locked in fierce debate over dinner. One insists that the pickled lark tongues he had last night were overcooked. The other counters that nothing compares to the velvet chewiness of a well-brined flamingo tongue. Soaked overnight in date wine, simmered in cinnamon broth, and served on silver spoons etched with quotes from Virgil. Casual. You blink, and then you follow them. Wouldn't you? They lead you toward the Palatine Hill, where the city quiets just enough for your ears to stop ringing. Marble buildings rise like frozen waves, their facades shadowed by swaying laundry and fig trees in full leaf. The two senators pause to greet a woman holding a tiny dog in one arm and a jar of pickled onions in the other. She nods regally and disappears behind a heavy curtain into a courtyard that smells like lemon oil and old money. You don't follow her, you're still tailing the food philosophers. One of them, let's call him Gaius, waves toward a passing litter. The man reclining inside lifts a bejeweled finger in greeting but says nothing. You recognize him from earlier, the flamingo complainer. Apparently, his tongue crisis has gone citywide. Gaius sighs and says, I blame Apicius. Ever since he popularized the flamingo, everyone thinks their dinners need one. His companion snorts. Apicius is dead. Exactly, says Gaius. And yet his recipes still ruin my appetite. You almost trip on a paving stone trying not to laugh. And yet they're not wrong. Apicius, the man, the myth, or possibly both, did set a standard for excess. His legacy cookbook, De Re Coquinaria, still circulates among the rich, copied painstakingly by slaves who've never tasted half of what they're writing down. The senators stop to admire a potted rosemary bush. You take the chance to slip past them, pretending to inspect a mosaic wall, and find yourself suddenly in front of a domus gate. A private home, big enough to have servants but small enough to escape imperial scrutiny. The scent of roasting meat curls from a chimney. You peek in and catch a glimpse of what a patrician prep looks like. Through the open courtyard, you see marble columns framing a sunlit atrium. Slaves move quickly, but not hurriedly. Efficiency born of practice. One carries a stack of clean linen napkins. Another pours olive oil through a cheesecloth funnel into glass jars. You catch a flash of feathers, pink ones, being carried reverently across the room like treasure. You exhale slowly. So it's true. Even here, in a modest home by Roman standards, the flamingo tongue has made its appearance. The tongue itself, you recall, is tiny, a few bites at most. But the process of getting one to the plate? Production. Flamingos weren't native to Rome. They came from Africa, most likely Egypt or from Hispania's marshlands. They were captured, transported, sometimes even force-fed to fatten them up. Then, after a long journey and even longer preparation, their little tongues were plucked for elite consumption. Talk about having a lot on your plate for very little on your fork. Historians still argue whether these practices were as widespread as the satirical poets claim, or exaggerated to mock the gluttony of the elite. Juvenal, for example, practically turned flamingo tongue into a punchline. But satire works best when it's rooted in something disturbingly real. A servant brushes past, holding a tray of cheeses molded to resemble miniature gods. Another carries a decanter of wine so dark it might as well be ink. You're almost hypnotized by the rhythm of it all, the deliberate, rehearsed movements of people who have done this so often they barely think. Suddenly, you hear a voice behind you. Looking for work? It's dry, amused, and undeniably directed at you. You turn and find a kitchen steward watching from the gate. He's dressed plainly, sleeves rolled, fingers stained with wine and something darker. Possibly beet juice, hopefully not blood. He gestures toward the house. "No openings," he says, "unless you can sing, or juggle, or clean squid without gagging." You shake your head. "Thought so," he smirks. "Well, stay out of the triclinium if you value your nose. They're testing a new scent blend tonight. Roses and goat fat." He disappears before you can ask whether that was a joke. Still, your curiosity propels you forward. You follow the scent trail, drifting toward the back of the dormice where the real culinary magic or madness happens. There, nestled between columns and kitchen smoke, are two young cooks bickering over spicing ratios for the flamingo tongues. One insists on cloves and coriander. The other swears by asafoetida and a dash of vinegar. You wonder if the flamingo would have had a preference. Behind them, on a stone counter, rests a large platter ringed with edible flowers and sea salt crystals. The centerpiece? A silver dish of curled, reddish-pink tongues, glistening like tiny sea creatures awaiting judgment. Decorative lemon wedges sit off to the side, dramatically unused. This isn't about taste. It's about proof. Proof that your host had enough clout to serve something utterly ridiculous and get away with it. You take a deep breath. The kitchen heat makes your eyelids heavy. Or maybe it's the steady rhythm of clinking bowls, the murmurs of boiling pots, and the knowledge that somewhere upstairs, senators are still arguing about whether parrot tongue might become the next big thing. One of the cooks sprinkles saffron over the dish with a flourish. The tongues shimmer gold in the firelight. And for the briefest second, you kind of get it. The flamingo aviary is quieter than you expected. Tucked behind a high garden wall in one of Rome's more exclusive villas, it's a pocket of stillness in the middle of a city that never stops clanking, hawking, and shouting over itself. You slip through a narrow archway, the scent of rosemary and citron wafting through the warm afternoon air, and there they are. Flamingos, dozens of them, all standing on one leg, their pink feathers glowing in the dappled light like strange fruit on elegant stalks. Some groom themselves with lazy dignity. Others stare into the distance as though pondering the futility of it all, or maybe just wondering when someone's going to clean the water. You move slowly, careful not to startle them. A garden slave, dressed in a tunic the color of old parchment, sits on a low bench nearby, feeding the birds from a shallow tray. The mixture looks like crushed mollusks and flower petals. Possibly is. "These belong to the consul's wife," the boy says without turning. "She likes to hear them squawk at sunrise." You nod. That tracks. They are beautiful, no denying that. Legs like polished coral, necks like twisted ribbons, eyes that seem just this side of sarcastic. You almost forget that their tongues are what you're supposed to be impressed by. Until, of course, one yawns. There it is. The tongue. Short, ridged, muscular, more functional than fancy. You've seen finer cuts of meat from a butcher's back shelf. But in this city, at this moment in time, it might as well be made of gold. "Why the tongue?" you ask aloud. The boy shrugs. "Because you can't eat the voice." An answer worthy of a poet. Or a sleep-deprived chef. The Romans had a knack for turning the improbable into the irresistible. Exoticism was the whole point. It wasn't just that flamingos were rare, they were absurd. Majestic and useless and strange enough to make an entrance all by themselves. A flamingo on your plate said, "I don't just win, I confuse you while doing it." One historian wrote that tongues were believed to concentrate flavor. Maybe. Others suggest it was the texture. A chewy softness that resisted the tooth just enough to be interesting. Then again, historians still argue whether the entire flamingo obsession was more about presentation than palate. Did anyone actually like the taste? Or was it just the edible equivalent of wearing 10 rings on one hand and calling it subtle? You lean on the garden wall, watching one bird preen under a fig tree. It looks peaceful, maybe even bored. and you wonder if it knows its ancestors were revered in Egypt, painted on tomb walls and associated with the sun god Ra. If this bird could read, it might enjoy the irony of going from divine symbol to appetizer. You turn your gaze to the villa behind you. The marble portico glistens, and you can just make out the domed roof of the atrium inside. Somewhere in there, a cook is already prepping the next banquet, grumbling over spice costs and broken amphory. Your eyes drift back to the flamingos. Some are banded with tiny bronze rings, markings of ownership, or perhaps just to distinguish which tongue belongs to which senator's supper. One stares back at you, head cocked slightly, as if to say, "You too, huh?" It's not a stretch to imagine a host bragging that the tongue they're serving came from the fast one, the dancer, the one that liked grapes. These birds are no longer creatures. They're characters in the ongoing drama of Roman luxury. You hear footsteps, not rushed, purposeful. A steward enters the garden carrying a small scroll and a thin blade tucked into his belt. Not for violence, but for slicing bread, fruit, or perhaps trimming basil leaves into neat, delicate shapes. He pauses to check on the birds, nods once. Then, in a tone you can't quite place between reverence and routine, he mutters, "For tongues tonight, the consul has guests from Carthage." You instinctively count the flamingos. There are far more than 4, but somehow that doesn't comfort you. Back in the city center, people are queuing for porridge and spiced chickpeas. Here, in this strange oasis, tongues are booked like theater seats. You half expect to see a dinner menu carved in marble, listing flamingo tongue, imported just above eel liver dumplings, and turnips of exceptional shape. The steward leaves, and the birds return to their slow ballet of standing and shifting, standing and shifting. One lowers its beak to the water and drinks, ripples breaking the mirrored sky. You sit for a while on a warm stone bench, trying to imagine the conversation that first led someone to say, "You know what would really impress the emperor? Flamingo tongue." Was it a dare? A drunken bet? Or just one of those bizarre ideas that stuck because no one had the nerve to say, "That's insane." You think about what it means to desire something only because it's rare, to chase taste not for pleasure but for power, and how, sometimes, the most useless part of a thing becomes the most valuable simply because no one else thought to want it. A breeze brushes the garden, carrying the smell of crushed mint and sun-warmed feathers. You close your eyes and let the strangeness of it all settle into your bones. You're deep in the empire now, the smells, the sounds, the surreal choices. And tonight, at some candlelit table draped in silk and ego, a small silver dish will arrive. Inside it, a few curled slivers of tongue, a performance, a flex, a whisper from a world where nothing was ever too much. And you're still watching the birds. The kitchen is hotter than Hades' pantry. You're not even near the fire yet, but your tunic clings like wet laundry and your forehead glistens with effort you haven't made. The air is thick with steam, smoke, and spices you can't name but could probably taste just by breathing. You've slipped in through a side entrance, not exactly invited, but not stopped either. Roman kitchens are busy enough that one more pair of eyes doesn't matter unless you're in the way. So you lean against a smooth, soot-stained pillar and observe the controlled chaos. 3 cooks move like dancers around a central hearth. Pots bubble, knives flash. A boy stirs honey into a basin the size of a wine barrel while muttering something about the wrong type of lavender. A young girl fans a spit, coaxing a peacock into golden perfection. Its tail feathers have been removed for roasting and pinned back on with cloves for serving. Everything's theatrical, everything's edible, sometimes both at once. And then, at the far end of the room, you spot the main attraction. Flamingo tongues, nestled in a tray lined with fig leaves and drizzled lightly with oil and vinegar. They look less like food and more like items from a jeweler's collection. Gleaming, curled, and crimson. One of the senior cooks approaches them with the solemnity of a priest. He wears a woolen band to keep sweat from dripping into the food, and his hands are dyed red from beets or possibly pomegranate. He murmurs a blessing, not religious but culinary, before lifting the tray and setting it near a fire pit where steam rises in lazy ribbons. You inch closer, pretending to examine a stack of garbanzo beans. From here, you can hear him muttering ingredients under his breath. Wine, pepper, cumin, asafoetida, honey, date paste. That's the base marinade. For tongues, you suddenly feel underqualified for your own dinner. As he begins the prep, 2 assistants arrive, each bearing a bowl. One contains the wine and spice blend, sharp, sweet, and eye-watering. The other holds a paste the color of burnt amber, date puree mixed with crushed pine nuts. One of them stirs the bowls slowly while the cook brushes the tongues with both, alternating layers like a potter glazing amphory. There's no rush. Each tongue is basted, rotated, and gently scored to ensure it curls properly in the heat. It's not just cooking, it's stagecraft. Historians still argue whether flamingo tongues were genuinely enjoyed or tolerated for status. Ancient texts describe them as tender, with a pleasing resistance. But satire, like that of Martial or Petronius, paints a more skeptical picture. The dishes often feel more like props in a social arms race than actual delicacies. Be careful not to overcook, the senior cook warns. They're ruined if they stiffen. You watch, transfixed, as one assistant lifts the tray with tongs and slowly places it over the coals. The tongues begin to shimmer, the outer skin puckering, the edges curling like scrolls touched by fire. A smell rises, not unpleasant, but startlingly rich. Sweet wine, singed meat, and a faint metallic tang. You'd never guess what it was unless someone told you, or perhaps especially if they told you. Behind you, someone sneezes from the pepper. You turn and spot a scribe, yes, a kitchen scribe, writing down adjustments to the recipe as they're spoken. Tonight's blend includes a pinch more myrrh than last week. This batch is for a general's retirement feast. He fought in Mauritania, apparently, and prefers a bit of desert in his dishes. You try not to imagine what that means. In another corner, a different cook is constructing a jellyfish aspic. Yes, really, he's pressing it into a dolphin-shaped mold. You blink and decide to focus back on the flamingos. At least they once walked on land. You catch snippets of gossip as the tongues roast. One assistant whispers that last week, the host served phoenix eggs. Another mutters that they were just dyed goose eggs. But the guests applauded anyway. As long as they believe it, it's worth it. And there it is, the essence of Roman gourmet culture. It's not about sustenance, it's about the story, the illusion, the performance on the plate. You glance at a clay tablet hanging from a hook. Scrawled across it are the courses for tonight's cena. Starter, lettuce hearts with vinegar pearls. Intermezzo, sea urchin custard. Main, flamingo tongues with pine nut glaze. Finale, gilded almond paste in the shape of gladiators. You blink again. Did that last one say gladiators? Yes. Yes, it did. And here's the kicker. Only 5 tongues will be served. There are 12 guests, but no one will complain, because just being near the dish, watching it arrive, inhaling its myth is enough. It's a performance, a rumor in real time. The senior cook lifts the tray and inspects the tongues. One has overcurled, a delicate way of saying it looks like a burned pink shrimp. He removes it from the tray with tweezers and sets it aside with a sigh. The remaining tongues are laid onto a plate in a spiral pattern, like flower petals or a small, edible galaxy. Someone begins carving thin slices of lemon rind to crown the dish. Another places a few candied rose petals in the center. It is undeniably beautiful. Bizarre but beautiful. The plate is covered with a silver dome and whisked away on a tray borne by 2 servants who treat it as though it holds the emperor's newborn child. And then it's gone. Silence settles over the kitchen. A moment of reverence. The kind you get after a symphony or a really good nap. You exhale. The heat, the noise, the spectacle. It all fades into a strange calm. Somewhere in the house, the tongues will be revealed with dramatic flair, consumed with careful praise, and debated over by people who will later forget how many flamingos died for their anecdote. You stay just a moment longer. Then you step back into the corridor, stomach turning. Not from disgust, exactly, but from the surreal realization that you've now seen how tongues become legend. You follow the gentle clatter of silverware and muffled laughter through a pillared corridor, its walls painted with faded frescoes of wine gods and reclining nymphs. The air has changed, less smoky, more perfumed. You're entering the triclinium, the Roman dining room, and tonight, it's the stage for something halfway between a feast and a fever dream. You don't walk in. That would be too obvious. Instead, you press into the shadow of a fig tree just outside the open doors and peer in as if watching a play, which, in a way, you are. The guests are already lounging on their sides atop cushioned couches arranged in a U-shape around a low table. Their togas cascade like silk waterfalls over the edge of each platform. A musician plucks a gentle melody on a lyre nearby. Someone else is reading a love poem, softly, dramatically, and with enough pauses to make you question if they've forgotten how it ends. And in the center of it all, lit by a cluster of hanging oil lamps and the occasional sparkle of gold jewelry, the flamingo tongues. They sit under a silver dome, which is lifted with the kind of reverence normally reserved for unveiling statues or new emperors. The aroma seeps into the air, sweet, warm, with an undertone of roasted extravagance. Gasps, a few polite claps. One woman fans herself dramatically and murmurs something about the pink curl of fortune. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds expensive. The host beams. He's middle-aged, soft around the edges, with a beard so carefully trimmed it probably has its own servant. He makes a toast, something about victory, legacy, and the glory of unusual birds. Then the tasting begins. The tongues are served in tiny portions. Some guests get half a tongue, others just a sliver. No one complains. Instead, they chew with visible deliberation, eyes half closed, nodding as if decoding poetry. You can't hear every word, but fragments drift out. Delicate yet defiant, tender, like night wind on marble. Needs more cumin. One man laughs too loudly, gesturing with a silver spoon. At least they're not parrot tongues. Last week I nearly chipped a tooth. Someone snorts into their wine. You see a servant wince. Another guest calls for more peacock wine. You're not sure what that is, but based on the evening's logic, it probably involves feathers. You watch as the entertainment shifts. A slender figure in a sheer tunic begins reciting passages from Ovid. The rhythm of the Latin is soothing, lyrical, hypnotic, perfect for digestion. Then, a change. A mime steps into the center, dressed like Mercury, complete with winged sandals and a drawn-on smile. The mime begins a silent reenactment of the discovery of Flamingo. It's bizarre. He mimics creeping through marshes, tiptoeing, miming the squawk of a bird, then triumphantly lifting an invisible tongue into the air. The crowd roars with laughter, though one guest looks genuinely moved. You lean against the column and try not to exhale too loudly. This isn't just dinner, it's cultural performance. A flex disguised as refinement. Food as spectacle, as story, as status. Here, the tongue isn't the point. The point is being the kind of person who can talk about flamingo tongues casually while being serenaded by a pan flute solo. Historians still argue whether these kinds of dinners were common or satirical exaggerations of the wealthy elite. But based on what you're seeing, it doesn't seem so far-fetched. The absurd was practically a currency in Rome. If it made someone raise an eyebrow, it was worth doing. Twice. One guest, a thin man in golden sandals, leans back and declares that next week, he'll host a cena featuring 8 different kinds of tongue. Someone counters that they once tried giraffe tongue in Alexandria, but found it unyielding. Another boasts about jellyfish pies in Pergamum. The conversation swirls in and out of mythology, food lore, and low-key bragging with the grace of a drunken charioteer. You're mesmerized, not by the food exactly, but by the way it fills the room. How it commands so much attention, so much effort, all for a few bites. The tongues are gone now, vanished into satisfied bellies and potential anecdotes. Yet their presence still lingers, like incense or ego. A servant passes with a tray of digestives, spiced date wine, and tiny candied olives. Another clears plates with a cloth that looks softer than your pillow back in the insula. You realize how far away you are from that cramped, smoky room, not just in space but in spirit. This world of velvet voices and tongue-shaped trophies doesn't touch most Romans. But it casts a long shadow. A boy leans against a statue, yawning. You feel it too. A strange fatigue. Maybe it's the perfumed air, or the weight of watching people pretend to be full of grace when really, they're just full of tongue. You take one last look into the triclinium. The mime is gone. The lyre player hums a tune you vaguely recognize from a bathhouse 2 streets over. The guests sip and stretch and slide into that dreamy state of post-feast satisfaction where time feels soft and thoughts blur at the edges. No one's talking about politics anymore, or war, or law. Just flamingos, just food, just that fragile feeling that, for tonight, everything excessive is justified. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow they'll probably try to outdo it. You slip away, back into the cooler corridor, and breathe in the relief of night air. Behind you, laughter echoes. A last ripple of delight from a dinner that will be retold, exaggerated, and forgotten in equal measure. But for now, in this moment, you've seen it. The Roman elite, the flamingo tongue, the opera of dinner. And yes, someone really did try to rhyme saffron with flamingen. The triclinium fades behind you, and with it, the warm haze of lamplit luxury and odes to poultry. You step out into the courtyard, blinking as your senses recalibrate. The night air is cooler now, and the stars are just beginning to assert themselves above the Roman skyline, flickering faintly beyond the haze of wood smoke and roasting ambition. Your stomach rumbles, not in hunger exactly, more in confusion. Flamingo tongues, eel custards, sea urchin puddings. It's a menu designed more for memory than metabolism. You realize now why ancient Roman dinner parties often included an entire course just to make you vomit and start again. Yes, really. It was called the vomitorium, and though scholars now argue it wasn't actually a dedicated room for purging, the custom of making room wasn't entirely myth. You shake the thought and wander down a garden path, past statues of gods who probably disapprove of half of what just happened in their marble-scented presence. You pass a servant carrying away an enormous bowl of leftover lentils, clearly untouched. Flamingo had taken center stage, leaving the legumes to sulk in silence. Your sandals crunch on gravel. Somewhere nearby, a fountain gurgles. You follow the sound until it leads you to a smaller, more private area of the villa. There, beneath a pergola strung with fading jasmine, you find a man seated on a stool. He's old, with a face like folded parchment and the posture of someone who's bent over ovens most of his life. In his lap is a small jar of garum. He notices you and chuckles. "Curious, are you?" You nod and he gestures you closer. "Garum," he says, unscrewing the lid, "is the soul of Roman cuisine. Not the flamingo, not the peacock. This." He waves the jar slightly under your nose. You recoil instinctively. It smells like a sea monster's armpit. Salty, sharp, a little like wet socks that tried their best and failed. "Delicious, isn't it?" He grins. You blink. "No, truly," he says. "It goes on everything. Bread, fish, fruit. I've seen someone stir it into custard." You're trying not to breathe. Historians agree that garum was the umami bomb of the Roman world. A fermented fish sauce made by layering small fish, anchovies, mackerel, sometimes sardines, with salt in large clay vats and letting the Mediterranean sun do the rest. Weeks, sometimes months, passed before it reached peak putridity. Then it was strained, bottled, and sold for prices that would make a modern Caesar blush. But the real magic, it didn't just taste like salt and sea. It tasted like wealth, like connection. Roman kitchens imported garum from as far as Hispania, Gaul, and even North Africa. The best garum was amber-colored and clear, known as garum sociorum, a delicacy in itself, and one that could cost more than wine or slaves. The old man spoons a drop onto a chunk of bread and offers it to you. You hesitate, then take it, because why not? The taste hits immediately. Salty, sharp, oddly complex. Like olives had a midlife crisis and decided to go swimming. Not bad, though. Just strange. You chew thoughtfully and he nods. "See?" he says. "Tongue is theater. Garum is truth. That might be the most poetic thing you've heard all night. You sit beside him as he rattles off other garum pairings. Baked apples, barley stew, boiled cabbage. Even milk, though only the brave try that one twice. He describes a senator who traveled with his own garum jug. Refused to eat without it. The sauce wasn't just seasoning. It was identity. Historians still debate how closely modern fish sauces, like those used in Southeast Asian cooking, resemble Roman garum. Recipes differ, but the spirit, the funky, fermented, deeply addictive flavor, remains. Garum may be ancient history, but its ghost lingers in modern kitchens, whispering secrets from clay jars and sun-warmed amphory. The old man leans back, holding the jar like a sacred relic. They'll forget the Flamingo, he says, but this is what they'll write about. You smile. It's the first truly humble thing you've heard all day. As you stand to leave, he offers you a parting gift, a wax-sealed vial of garum. You thank him politely, though you're already thinking of how to hide it far, far away from your pillow. You exit through the side gate, still savoring the tangy residue on your tongue. It's odd, but in a pleasant way, like tasting history, like knowing that no matter how bizarre the main course might be, there's always something anchoring the madness. Outside the villa, the city breathes. Shops are closing. Lanterns flicker in windows. Dogs bark somewhere far off. You pass a bakery still warm from the coals and catch a whiff of fresh bread mingled with ash. You glance back toward the house, now hushed. The guests are probably reclining in sleepy delight, discussing politics or poetry or how next week's tongues might be prepared with crushed pearls or cedar smoke. But you know the truth now. Flamingo tongues may steal the show, but garum runs the kitchen. And somehow, impossibly, your stomach feels satisfied, or at least less confused. You leave the villa behind, stepping out into the cooler embrace of Roman night. The streets are quieter now. Less shouting, more murmured conversations, and the occasional clink of amphory being stacked for tomorrow's trade. You make your way through winding alleyways, the kind that curve like spilled wine through the Subura district, heading toward your own modest corner of the city. But before you can get too far, it hits you. Not the Flamingo tongue, thankfully. Not directly. It's your stomach. There's a low rumble, then a twist, then a bloated, sluggish discomfort that feels like you've swallowed a scroll and it's trying to rewrite your intestines. You lean against a stone wall, trying to breathe evenly. The garum-touched bread, the over-perfumed air, the visual trauma of a mime pretending to be a flamingo. It's all catching up to you. You're not alone. Down the street, a man leans out of a tenement window and burps with the enthusiasm of a trumpet player. A woman in the doorway across the way fans herself dramatically and mutters, "Too much eel again. Welcome to the lesser-discussed side of Roman cuisine." The aftermath. Sure, everyone talks about the feasting, the flavors, the exotic dishes so rare they practically glow. But no one talks about what happens 3 hours later, when the cumin and honey begin negotiating with your lower intestines. You shuffle toward a fountain and sit heavily on the edge. The water trickles over worn lion heads, and somewhere in the dark, frogs chirp like sarcastic applause. You're not alone in your discomfort. Around the corner, a man paces while patting his belly and muttering about the dangers of peacock eggs. Another groans theatrically and demands a sprig of mint to chew. Someone else is reciting a prayer to Apollo, not for enlightenment but for antacid. Historians still argue whether Romans truly suffered for their food or just liked to dramatize the digestive process. Satirists of the time delighted in describing guests keeling over mid-course or bursting into sweat during particularly spicy stews. Was it exaggerated? Probably. But given what they were eating, fish sauce over fruit, fermented sauces on oysters, honey-glazed dormice stuffed with nuts, maybe not. There was, in fact, an entire market for digestion aids. Dried herbs, chalky powders, medicinal wines steeped with fennel or dill. One popular remedy involved ground-up cuttlefish bone mixed with vinegar. Another included ash from burnt snail shells. You politely decline both. Instead, you stay put by the fountain, hoping that cool water and time will do the trick. A boy walks by with a basket of anise cakes. Small, dry, and designed to settle the stomach. He offers you one for a single coin. You accept, biting into the brittle little biscuit. It tastes like black licorice met sandpaper at a party neither of them wanted to attend. Still, it helps. As you sit, chewing thoughtfully, you remember something from earlier in the day. A vendor at the Forum Boreum selling sprigs of mint and mumbling, "For the after-dinner struggle." At the time, it had seemed like a throwaway joke. Now it feels like prophecy. You watch the night unfold. A couple argues softly under a fig tree. A dog trots past carrying a half-eaten crust in its mouth. The moon glows faintly above a distant rooftop where someone plays a wooden flute, slowly and without any particular skill. The city is digesting. All of it. Not just you, not just the tongues, but the city itself, processing a day full of trade, talk, and tastings. Every villa and apartment is a stomach in motion, churning ambition and appetite in equal measure. You think about the Flamingo again. So small, so specific, so oddly chewy, and yet it caused this entire spiral of events. The kitchen ballet, the silver platters, the philosophical toast about pink fortune. It's a ridiculous thing to eat, and somehow that's the point. The elite didn't just eat to live. They lived to eat what others couldn't. They consumed uniqueness the way others consume bread, hungrily, possessively, with a glint of performance in their eyes. It wasn't just food. It was proof. Proof that they mattered, that they had access, that they could turn a bird's tongue into a bragging right and a social gambit. You burp gently. Anise helps. The night helps more. A woman passes by carrying a sleeping baby and a bundle of herbs. She smiles at you without stopping. You nod. Somehow, she understands everything you're not saying. Eventually, you rise and walk again. Slower now, more careful. You stop at a public bathhouse, still open, its steam curling out like sleepy breath. A man inside offers you a sip of herbal water. You accept. It's bitter but grounding. There's peace in the simplicity of it. No flamingos, no mimes, just hot water, a quiet room, and the dull hum of digestion. You sit for a while, watching others enter and exit, wrapped in towels and silence. One man mutters something about his cousin choking on a fig seed during dessert. No one reacts. It's a common enough story. As the heat soothes your muscles and the awkward fullness eases, you feel the absurdity of the evening stretch itself out and settle. Like a toga draped just right. Flamingo tongue may be rare. Garum may be eternal. But nothing beats warm water and cool night air when your belly's doing the waltz. You'll survive. Probably. Maybe don't eat any more tongue for a while, though. You step out of the bathhouse feeling like a fresh-baked loaf. Steamy, soft, and oddly aware of your own crust. The streets of Rome stretch before you in ribbons of amber torchlight and echoing sandal taps. The city has quieted, but it hasn't slept. Rome never really does. As you head toward the Aventine, the neighborhoods shift. The air feels lighter here, scented with pine and cypress, not smoke and stew. You're nearing the villas of the extremely well-connected, the kind of homes with peacocks for pets and fish ponds deeper than your apartment is wide. And here, in the glow of the wealthier quarter, you stumble into something unusual. Convoy, small, subtle, 2 oxen carts, a handful of armed guards, and 3 men in cloaks arguing over cargo weight. You duck into a shadowed archway and watch. One of the carts is uncovered, and under the moonlight you catch sight of it. Cages, dozens of them. Inside, birds, tall pink, shimmering birds. Flamingos, the feathers flutter slightly in the breeze. One squawks in protest. Another simply stands, regal and resigned, like it knows exactly where this journey ends. You found it, a flamingo shipment, imported, protected, and very much alive. You can almost hear the kitchen orders echoing in the distance. Tongues only, please, and be sure to keep the feathers intact for the centerpiece. The guards move the carts slowly through the gates of a domus. You glimpse the crest of a senator on the outer wall, someone whose name gets murmured over garum-glazed artichokes. You'd wager a small amphora of olive oil that at least half the tongues will end up at tomorrow's banquet. You move along the wall, watching as slaves unload crates of dried herbs, jars of date syrup, and sealed amphorae. ingredients from across the empire, all converging on this single villa for one night of highly curated indulgence. The supply chains of ancient Rome are quietly astonishing. Flamingos weren't plucked from the local fountain. They came from the Nile Delta, the salt marshes of Hispania, the swamps of Mauritania, captured by hunters, herded in impossible numbers, and transported by boat and cart across thousands of miles. All for a bird that couldn't even squawk properly in captivity. Historians still argue whether these extravagant supply lines were sustainable or foolishly wasteful. The evidence leans both ways. Roman records show detailed accounts of animal shipments for public games and private dinners alike. Yet the cost was enormous. One letter from a shipping merchant complains about the ridiculous weight of bird cages compared to their monetary value. And that was just for the geese. You wonder how many flamingos actually made it to their intended dinner plate. Between the stress of travel and Rome's famously unpredictable parties, it's likely that many of them expired en route or were replaced with cheaper birds and dyed feathers. You keep walking. Farther up the hill, another villa glows with torchlight. You smell roast lamb and something tangy, pomegranate, maybe. The air is so thick with perfume it could knock out a small horse. You slip around the side, toward the servants' entrance. Here it's all motion. Crates being opened, linens folded, salt packed into clay bowls. And there, near a small cistern, a man counting tongues. Literally. He crouches beside a tray, whispering numbers as he checks each carefully arranged portion. You hear 9, 10, 11. Good. The consul's guests will be satisfied. Beside him, a parchment scroll lists more than ingredients. It includes guest names, seating preferences, and tongue counts. One senator has requested his be served with honeyed sesame and the gaze of a disinterested youth. You're not even sure if that's metaphor or garnish. You glance up at the villa's roofline. Vines crawl along the marble like decorative veins. You imagine the host inside, sipping wine and mentally ranking his guests by how enthusiastically they praise the flamingo. To compliment the tongue too quickly might seem desperate. Too late, and you risk seeming unrefined. Back at the servants' station, a conversation bubbles up. They want 20 by the Saturnalia feast. 20? Someone groans. We'll have to raid the marshes again. Or bribe the harbor inspector. Or switch to parrots. No one notices if you grind enough pepper on it. You almost laugh, but you bite your tongue, so to speak. It becomes clear. Flamingo tongues aren't just luxury. They're logistics, trade, timing, and table theater all rolled into one mouthful. Each tongue represents hours of preparation, miles of travel, and the fragile ego of an elite who needs dinner to say what his words can't. You lean against a tree and think about what's actually being consumed. Not just the bird, but status, territory, power, one bite at a time. The thought makes your head spin. Or maybe that's the lingering effects of anise and garum. Either way, you decide it's time to step away from the madness. As you walk downhill, toward more humble districts, the torches thin and the stars reclaim the sky. The air is cooler here, less scented, more real. You pause at a quiet intersection and look up. A flamingo feather, caught on the breeze, drifts down past your face and lands at your feet. You pick it up. It's warm from travel, or maybe imagination. You tuck it into your tunic and keep walking. Because somehow, tonight, that single feather feels more nourishing than the whole tongue ever could. The streets grow narrower as you descend into the older neighborhoods of Rome, where the marble fades and the cobbles are worn smooth by centuries of sandals and cartwheels. Here, the city exhales. No flamingo tongues, no mimes in mercury hats, just the smell of cooking lentils and laundry water poured from second-story windows. You pause beneath a crooked arch where 3 oil lamps flicker lazily. Their light plays across a wall etched with messages. Some political graffiti, some romantic promises, and one enthusiastic endorsement of a local sausage vendor. All in all, more honest than any dinner toast you've heard tonight. A man walks past, whistling, with a basket of onions on one shoulder and a sleeping cat balanced improbably on the other. You give him a nod. He nods back, the universal Roman signal for We're both surviving this chaos. Ahead, you hear voices. Two magistrates locked in debate. Not about taxes. Not about the war in Dacia. No, they're arguing over food regulations. You shuffle closer, trying to appear casual as you lean near a shadowed colonnade. It's out of control, one says, adjusting his toga like it might give him moral high ground. You've seen the last 3 banquets. Flamingo tongues, camel hooves, smoked starfish. Do we have no restraint? His companion, thinner and deeply unimpressed, replies, restraint isn't fashionable. Everyone wants to be seen eating something we can barely name. Exactly. The first continues, which is why we need to reinforce the lex fania. Cap spending, limit courses, restore dignity to the table. You blink. Lex fania, the ancient Roman version of a dinner budget. Passed in 161 BCE, it was one of many sumptuary laws, attempts by the Roman government to stop the rich from going absolutely feral with food, fashion, and feasting. These laws tried to dictate how much meat a host could serve, what types of dishes were acceptable, even how many guests were permitted at a banquet. Historians still argue whether they were enforced with any consistency. Some sources suggest these laws were more symbolic than functional, like telling a lion to eat fewer gazelles because it's bad optics. Certainly, enforcement was spotty. For every official cracking down on an over-decorated ham, there was another quietly attending a flamingo tongue tasting on the sly. The second magistrate sighs. Even Cicero said these laws were like cobwebs, strong enough to catch the weak, but too flimsy to hold the powerful. You wonder who's hosting these over-the-top dinners. Senators? Generals? Or maybe merchants, new to money and eager to prove their tongues, avian and otherwise, belong in elite company. A third voice joins in, an older man with a grin made of sarcasm. Careful, he says. Ban flamingo tongues and you'll have a riot. Or worse, disappointed poets. They all laugh. You keep walking, past a tavern where a group of men drink flat wine and argue about grain prices. One of them gestures animatedly with a chicken drumstick. You're struck by the contrast. Here, meat is still a small miracle. Over on the Palatine, it's theater. You round the corner and find a small chalkboard nailed to a tavern wall. Today's offerings: lentil stew, boiled leeks, and bread with garum. Simple, cheap, and, given your current state, oddly tempting. You sit on a bench nearby and watch as people come and go. Some carry woven baskets. Others lead tired donkeys. A few glance at the chalkboard, nod, and step inside. No one asks for flamingo tongue. No one needs to. Here, food is about comfort, warmth, fuel. The stew simmers over an open flame, releasing the earthy scent of cumin and onion. You breathe it in like medicine. An old woman sits beside you without a word. She unwraps a cloth bundle and offers you half a loaf of barley bread. You accept with a quiet thanks, and she shrugs like it's nothing. Too much fancy food up the hill, she mutters. All noise and feathers. You smile. She gets it. She takes a bite of her bread and adds, when I was a girl, my neighbor tried to make peacock tongue pudding. Nearly burned down the insula. Never saw a peacock again. You laugh. It's the first time your stomach doesn't protest. The two of you sit there for a while, sharing bread and listening to the muffled city. Bakers packing up, children laughing somewhere down the street, a dog barking at its own echo. You think back to the banquet scroll, the tongue counters, the parade of spices and birds, and you can't help but wonder, where's the line between indulgence and absurdity? Between culinary pride and pure spectacle? One of the magistrates earlier had said, "We must eat to live, not live to eat." You imagine him saying that over a plate of boiled turnips while his wife is in the next room demanding jellyfish mousse. You finish your half of the bread, the crust dry but honest. Real food, simple, salty, sustaining. You rise from the bench and tuck your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The old woman gives you a nod, already lost in her own thoughts. As you walk on, you pass another group of diners gathered around a small fire. They're eating lentils straight from the pot, laughing, passing around a shared jug of something that smells like diluted wine and strong opinions. You don't stop. but you feel the warmth of it. Because down here, in the shadow of marble columns and gilded menus, Rome is still eating, still living, without feathers, without silver spoons, just a little garum, a lot of beans, and stories far richer than any flamingo tongue could ever be. Dawn begins its slow creep over Rome, painting the rooftops in soft orange and making the city's imperfections look momentarily poetic. You've made your way into the service alleys behind a once bustling villa. This is where the magic happens. After the applause dies down and the guests have stumbled home, clutching their stomachs and their gossip, you pass through an open courtyard littered with the aftermath of opulence. Empty amphorae lie sideways like toppled soldiers. A broken fig tart slumps beside a grape-stained napkin. The scent of burnt honey clings to everything. And beneath it all, the metallic tang of effort. You step into the kitchen's rear chamber, where the real stars of the show are just beginning to rest. They're everywhere, sleepy, slouched, or still moving in slow, resigned circles. The kitchen staff. One young woman scrubs a pan bigger than her torso. Another carefully removes singed rosemary sprigs from a bronze tray. A boy no older than 12 is scraping fish scales off the stone floor while humming a tune only half remembered. And then there's the head cook, perched on a stool, legs stretched, eyes closed, a ladle still clutched in one hand like a bedtime talisman. You're struck by how quiet it is. After a night of chaotic grandeur, the silence feels earned, heavy with the weight of labor, repetition, and the strange intimacy that comes from cooking food no one will ever thank you for. A basket of quills lies beside the fire pit, remnants from peacock and flamingo feathers plucked hours ago. They look like abstract art now, curled and forgotten, like dreams scribbled down after waking. You move slowly, careful not to disturb them. You overhear one servant whisper to another, "Did they even eat the tongues?" The other shrugs and mutters, "Didn't hear any praise. Just a poem about Saturn." You pause near the ash bin, where a stack of used spice sachets has been tossed. You recognize cardamom, cloves, even a few spent vanilla pods, rare, precious items brought in from India or beyond. All of it boiled, strained, and discarded. The ghosts of indulgence. Historians still debate how many of these spices were truly common in Roman kitchens and how often they were flaunted just for show. Some argue that the recipes recorded in cookbooks like Apicius were aspirational at best, more wish list than pantry list. Others believe that in certain circles, nothing was too rare, too costly, or too strange to toss into a sauce. And yet, for all the luxury, the cooks here wear the same expression you saw earlier on the bakers and herb sellers. Exhaustion flavored with resignation. You sit on an overturned grain basket, watching as one of the assistants oils a roasting spit so it won't rust overnight. Beside him, a girl methodically folds clean linen napkins back into their lacquered boxes. She works with the quiet efficiency of someone who's done this too many times to count. A dog trots in skinny, mottled, but well-fed enough to suggest it's part of the kitchen's ecosystem. It sniffs around the corner where the bones are dumped. Flamingo, lamb, eel, boar. All bones become equal in the end. You follow the dog and find a pile of discarded parts. Charred skins, overcooked tongues, and a single whole bird. Unserved, unchosen, maybe slightly too small to impress. It lies still on a cracked platter, legs curled under as if asleep. It's a reminder. Even the rarest delicacy can end up forgotten. Back in the main room, the youngest cook is practicing a carving motion with a dull knife and a loaf of stale bread. He slices carefully, mimicking the moves of the head chef from earlier, murmuring the names of spices as he works. You smile. This is where food lives, after the feast, in the hands of the tired, the unseen, the ones who made it possible. Not in poems, not in gossip, in soot, in sweat, in scorched fingernails and nicked thumbs. You spot a tall jar marked for staff only and recognize its contents as yesterday's barley stew, now thick with cooling starch. One of the cooks dips a ladle in and pours it into 4 bowls, sliding them across the prep table like a well-practiced card dealer. No garnish, no gold leaf, just warmth. You're offered a bowl. You accept. The simple, a little garum, a lot of barley, a hint of garlic. And it tastes real, hearty, like the opposite of flamingo tongue in every way that matters. You savor every bite. The cook beside you leans in and says, "The senator liked the flamingo, by the way. Said it reminded him of his youth." You raise an eyebrow. In that, it was expensive and mostly disappointing. You both laugh, the sound barely above a whisper but big enough to feel good. The first light of morning filters in through a high, cracked window. Dust motes swirl. The fire is almost out. One by one, the staff drifts off to nap corners or lean back against cool stone. Their eyes closing, hands still curled as if cradling spoons. You stay a little longer, soaking it in. This is the end of the feast. Not the table, not the toast, but here, in the cleanup, in the quiet aftermath, where food becomes memory and exhaustion turns into its own strange kind of satisfaction. You place your empty bowl in a stack and slip out the back door. The sun is rising. Rome is waking again. And the people who made the city's dreams edible? They're finally asleep. The light creeps back across the city like a cautious guest, revealing the wear and tear beneath Rome's polished face. Cracks in marble, chipped frescoes, and corners where even the rats don't bother to hide anymore. You walk slowly, following your nose, and a subtle shift in smells. Away from gold-plated kitchens and back into the streets where most Romans eat meals that don't have a tongue count. As you move through a crisscross of alleys, the sounds change. Hammers striking metal in a nearby forge. The squeal of a donkey refusing to deliver one more crate. The clatter of clay cups being stacked for a morning tavern rush. You smell porridge thick with lentils, onions frying in cheap oil, and the rich, earthy scent of boiled chickpeas. This is the Esquiline, working class, weary, and wonderfully blunt. You hear no odes to flavor here. No debate about saffron sourcing or whether the flamingo tongue was tender enough. These are people who cook what they can get and make it taste good enough to forget yesterday's news. You duck into a low-ceilinged insula kitchen, where the heat from a fire pit instantly warms your toes. An old man sits cross-legged, stirring a pot with a stick that might once have been part of a broom. A little girl beside him adds pinch after pinch of dried herbs, mostly at random. "Does it need more time?" she asks. The old man sniffs, shrugs, and says, "Needs more food, but we'll pretend." You crouch nearby. They're making pulse, a porridge of ground spelt or barley, cooked until it thickens into a spoon-defying mass. It's the ancient Roman every meal. Add some garum, maybe a sprinkle of chopped dates if you're lucky, and call it dinner. The girl offers you a spoonful. You accept, and it's better than expected, nutty, slightly sour, warming. No bird tongues, no citrus foam, just something that fills the belly and the moment. You glance around. The walls are smoky. The air smells like labor, but there's laughter here, real laughter. A woman in the next room sings as she kneads dough, slapping it against the table with a rhythm that could double as percussion. Someone tells a joke about a drunken legionary and a goose. Everyone groans. It's not glamorous, but it's alive. You pass another window, where someone's baking flatbread over a stone slab. The edges are charred, the center soft. She sells them for a coin each, and still some customers haggle. You buy one anyway, tear off a corner. The crunch is heavenly. You wander deeper into the neighborhood, weaving between shared courtyards where communal ovens are still warm from the night's baking. Here, you smell lentil soup simmering in wide clay pots, and cabbage being boiled into submission. You hear a man grumbling to no one in particular. Some senator's servant came down here last week asking for rosemary, for flamingo, said it had to be fresh from a common garden. He snorts. I told him to stuff it with vinegar and leave us our greens. There it is again, that strange intersection between worlds. The elite drifting through plebeian spaces when it suits them, gathering rustic ingredients to dress up dishes the average Roman couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. Historians still argue how much influence the lower classes had on elite cuisine. Some say peasant food trickled upward when cooks elevated it into haute status. Others insist it was stolen, modified, diluted, rebranded on a silver platter and passed off as invention. You pass a boy carrying a tray of charred onions topped with goat cheese. He tells you proudly, We serve it with a fig glaze now. Better than anything from those hilltop lunatics. You believe him. The divide is clear. On one side, tongues plated with poetry. On the other, stew with stories. And yet, you notice a quiet pride in both. A sense of ownership over food that nourishes not just the body but the life it supports, work, family, jokes about goats. Flamingos might be exotic, but barley and leeks have fed generations. You pass a temple under renovation, scaffolding creaking under the weight of dusty optimism. Two laborers nearby sit sharing a loaf of bread stuffed with pickled vegetables. One offers you a piece. You accept. The vinegar stings your tongue but wakes you up in a good way. They joke about a senator who tried to order fish sauce made from celibate anchovies because he believed it kept the flavor pure. Everyone laughs like it's the best lie they've heard all week. Probably is. You find a quiet bench outside a small fountain where women are washing clothes. One of them hums a lullaby. Another spits a fig seed and mutters, "Last night I dreamed I was a flamingo. I woke up hungry." You don't bother explaining the irony. Instead, you pull out the feather still tucked in your tunic and twirl it in your fingers. For a moment, you think of the dishes you saw, the gold-trimmed tongues, the carefully arranged petals, the silver serving spoons no one dared actually use. And then you look around. This is the other Rome, the one that doesn't perform hunger, but lives with it. Not the Rome of satire or scrolls, but of soup, shared spoons, and spices stolen in pinches from whatever herb grew stubborn enough to survive in a window box. You tuck the feather away, because sometimes survival tastes better than spectacle. The sun now fully coats the rooftops, casting long slatted shadows across the forum's worn paving stones. The market buzzes again, revived with fresh baskets, louder vendors, and new gossip. But as you wind your way back toward the city center, something's shifted. Whispers follow you like the smell of baking bread, soft, lingering, curious. "Did you hear?" One man says, arranging radishes. "They say flamingos are scarce this year," mutters another, tossing fish into a salt-crusted barrel. "Scarce." You pause by a garum stall where a barrel leaks slowly onto the floor like some ancient, savory metaphor. The stall owner barely looks up. Every villa wants flamingo. There aren't enough beaks to go around. He's not wrong. You spot a chalkboard behind him with a list of special requests. At the top, flamingo tongues, pending delivery. Beside it, a number scrawled in red, recently increased. You continue on, hearing the same murmurs ripple through butcher stalls and spice carts. The word has spread. Something once used to impress is now becoming impossibly hard to find. The city is entering a new stage of obsession, scarcity-induced desire. Historians still argue whether Rome's appetite for exotic foods was driven by taste or trend. Likely both. But the moment something couldn't be had easily, flamingo, silphium, Numidian dates, it stopped being just food. It became status incarnate. And now, the flamingo tongue is teetering dangerously close to extinction, or at least menu oblivion. You stop at a bird seller's tent. The cages are crowded with pigeons, quail, and two suspiciously long-legged birds wearing dyed pink feathers. The vendor sees you looking. "Flamingos," he declares. You raise an eyebrow. The left one blinks. "Okay, flaming-ish," he amends. He leans in. Everyone wants tongue, but tongues don't grow back. Supply and demand. Friend. You glance at the birds again. They're skinny, unimpressed, and clearly over the entire situation. A wealthy woman in embroidered sandals storms up behind you. "You said I'd have 10 tongues for tonight. There are only 4. The vendor bows, oily and apologetic. "Madam, perhaps we substitute with heron? Or paint the parrot tongues a touch redder?" She gasps as though physically slapped. "Parrot is last month, you impudent." She storms off. You sidestep quietly. Even black market flamingo parts are no match for trend fatigue. As you stroll onward, you catch snatches of new culinary rumors. Someone's experimenting with crocodile tongue. Another has crafted mock flamingo using sausage skins and beet juice. One patrician is serving peacock brain in tiny golden boats. The tongue may soon be passé, not because people dislike it, but because its unavailability makes it dangerous. Obsession has a short shelf life in Rome. A fruit vendor shakes her head as she slices melons. "Give it a month," she says. "They'll be after lark knees next. Or goat eyelashes." You can't tell if she's joking. You pause for a moment, looking up at the Temple of Saturn. Its columns rise high and silent, indifferent to culinary fads. It's a reminder that for all Rome's gluttonous inventions, this city has always danced on the edge of ridiculous and remarkable. It's not just about taste anymore. It's about identity. The idea that you, dear Roman elite, knew about flamingo tongues before they went mainstream. That you were chewing pink rarity while others were still boiling barley. But now the tide is shifting. You sit by a fountain, watching pigeons argue over breadcrumbs. A man nearby reads from a scroll, reciting aloud to a small crowd. "O palate of privilege, thou art fickle as Fortuna. Today the tongue of flamingo, tomorrow who knows? Shall we chew the air and pretend it's rare?" You clap. Lightly, he bows. A boy approaches, holding a small clay tablet etched with a dinner invitation. He reads it aloud, high-pitched and proud. "My master requests your presence for a private tasting, featuring ostrich marrow, fig-stuffed snail, and a tongue trifecta, goose, gull, and phoenix." You raise a hand. "Phoenix," he shrugs. "They've dyed a chicken red and added cinnamon." You thank him and decline politely. You've had enough tongue for a while. The city seems to agree. Word has it one villa lost 3 flamingos to heatstroke. Another imported a dozen, only to discover they were all male. Tongue yield reportedly disappointing. At the heart of it all is a fragile equation. Luxury equals rarity. But when the rare becomes ridiculous or runs out, the whole illusion collapses. You lean back, letting the marble fountain's coolness press against your shoulders. The pigeons flutter away, startled by a nearby sneeze. A dog yawns. Rome will always chase something. Flamingo tongue just happened to be this year's golden ticket. Tomorrow, it might be truffle-fed dormice or snake eggs arranged to look like stars. But tonight, the flamingo finds a moment of peace, caught between desire and disappearance. And you're content to let it go. The years pass like a slow spill of wine. Inevitable, a little sticky, and eventually, someone slips on it. You're older now, walking the same streets, but the city's face has changed. Statues weathered, graffiti faded, menus rewritten. Flamingo tongues? They've become a joke. You hear it in the taverns. Remember when Gaius served those flamingo tongues and called them a revolution in flavor? Please, I've had spelt porridge with more drama. You smile at the memory, because yes, once upon a time, people nearly dueled over who served the most tender avian tongue. Now, they toast ironically over chickpeas and quote the old Apicius like it's a tragic comedy. You find yourself standing outside a familiar villa, though it's crumbling at the edges. The gardens are overgrown. The mosaic floor in the atrium is cracked, and someone's left a chamber pot too close to a once regal statue of Apollo. The glory days have clearly fled the scene. Inside, the kitchen's cold. No fire. No scent of honey-glazed decadence or exotic pepper dust. Just cobwebs and broken amphory. You step carefully across the dusty tiles and spot something. A tray. Tarnished, dented, and etched faintly with the swirling pattern of that famous flamingo tongue dish. You brush it off. It's lighter than you remember. Or maybe you're just stronger now. Rome too has shifted. Emperors have risen and fallen. Luxury taxes tightened. The appetite for extravagance has dulled beneath war, debt, and the realization that food doesn't need to do backflips to be fulfilling. You head to the market, curious. The stalls are familiar, but the conversation has changed. "Beans again tonight?" A man groans. "Better than last week's lizard cakes," his friend replies. You spot a spice seller hawking authentic flamingo seasoning. A mix of dried beets, smoked salt, and a pinch of pride. It's a novelty item now, a culinary relic. "Tastes just like decadence," the man cries. "No birds harmed." You chuckle and move on. Historians still argue why some Roman fads collapse while others calcify into tradition. Flamingo tongue didn't survive the churn. Not just because it was absurd, but because it relied too much on performance. No one truly missed the flavor. They missed what it signaled. But once everyone had tried it, once the birds dwindled, the jokes multiplied, and someone inevitably choked on a bone at a senator's son's wedding, the tongue had sung its last song. You sit on a bench by the old forum, where lawyers now outnumber poets. Two boys walk past, one telling the other, "My father says flamingo was what old people ate when they didn't know better." The other makes a face. Gross. And there it is, the final transformation. From delicacy to punchline. You close your eyes and remember the dinner parties, the gold dishes, the carefully arranged petals, the mime impersonating a bird. You remember the cooks, bone-tired and dusted with cinnamon. The flamingos, still and proud, unaware of the culinary fate tied to their odd little tongues. Now, flamingo sightings are rare. The aviaries emptied, then repurposed. One became a pigeon racing coop. Another now hosts fig trees. The birds themselves returned, perhaps, to quieter marshes, where no one asks them to perform, pose, or boil. You hope so. You open your eyes as a breeze passes, carrying with it the scent of fresh bread, garlic, and yes, garum. Still here, still unpretentious. The one flavor Rome never abandoned. You wander past a tavern with an updated chalkboard. Tonight's menu: lentil stew with wild herbs, chickpea fritters, and for dessert, honeyed pears. No fanfare, no feathers, just food. You sit at a corner table and order the stew. As you eat, you overhear a younger couple chatting. "Did you know?" The woman says, "People used to eat just the tongues of flamingos?" The man frowns. "All that work for that part?" "Exactly." She shakes her head. "It's almost romantic, in a really, really inefficient way." You lean back, the warmth of the meal settling in your belly. A dog sleeps under your table. The lamps flicker gently. The noise of the city washes over you like a soft tide. There's no flamingo on your plate tonight. No silver, no spectacle. Just simple food, shared space, and the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need a stage. You pull the old feather from your pouch, faded now, less pink, more memory, and place it beside your bowl. Just for a moment, just to remember, because Rome, for all its posturing and pretension, eventually teaches everyone the same lesson. What lasts isn't the flavor of flamingo tongue. It's the stories. Your feet bring you, almost without thinking, to a place that feels both familiar and faintly imagined. A small hill just outside the city's noise, where you once watched flamingos preen under the dappled shade of fig trees. The aviary is long gone. In its place, wild grass and a stubborn olive tree, gnarled and unbothered by history. You sit beneath it, the bark at your back rough but comforting, the leaves whispering in the morning breeze. Rome hums in the distance, carpenters calling to each other, the rhythmic splash of laundry beaten against stone. Life practical and unadorned. You close your eyes, and memory arrives like a guest late to the party but still welcome. You see them again, the flamingos, their heads cocked in slow motion, legs like question marks scribbled into the marshy earth. You remember the mime, the silver trays, the cook brushing each tongue like it was a miniature masterpiece. You remember the first taste. Strange, sweet, brief. Back then, the world seemed obsessed with showing off through cuisine. How rare a dish could be, how far it had traveled, how delicately it could be prepared. Food wasn't just food. It was performance, currency, theater. But that Rome has changed. Or maybe you have. Now, meals are simpler. There are fewer toasts and more quiet chewing. More bread shared on stoops. More stories told with mouths still half full of lentils. And instead of flamingo tongues, people pass recipes for barley soup, tips for stretching a jar of garum, advice on coaxing one last bloom from an old rosemary bush. You pull from your tunic a scrap of parchment, a recipe copied hastily from an old kitchen wall. Not for anything luxurious, just for spiced bean stew with onion and lovage. You smile. It's a good one. Historians may still bicker over whether flamingo tongues were truly loved or merely tolerated, whether their flavor was exquisite or just expensive. But the people who made those meals, the cooks who never sat at the table, the ones who fell asleep with flour on their hands and firelight in their hair, they knew better. They knew that behind every absurd dish was effort, labor, hands blistered by hot pots and mouths too tired to taste what they served. You stand, stretch, and begin your slow walk back toward the city's pulse. The air is cooler now, the streets waking like a cat in the sun. Stretching, blinking, looking for breakfast. You pass a tavern offering honest porridge. You like the sound of that. Rome will always feast, sometimes with gold, sometimes with gruel, but always with a kind of stubborn pride that clings to the cobblestones and sings softly in the steam of soup. You duck into the tavern, find a seat near the back. The server brings a bowl and a nod. You eat slowly, spoon by spoon, as the light changes and the city moves on. A couple at the next table debates whether saffron is worth the price. Someone nearby hums a lullaby. A bowl clinks gently against the wood. And above it all, you smile. Because once upon a time, you watched flamingos in the morning light. And you've been full ever since. The streets of Rome now fade to a whisper. The bustle softened, the light dimming behind clouds of memory. You've walked through kitchens and courtyards, banquet halls and street stalls. You've stood in the heat of fire pits and the hush of empty gardens, listening to the strange poetry of a world that once mistook bird tongues for greatness. Now, as the evening stretches into silence, your body settles. Your breath slows. The hum of Rome fades beneath the rhythm of your heartbeat. You remember the sounds, the clang of pots, the puff of powdered spices shaken into the air. You remember the laughter, the quiet frustration, the eager whispers of recipes passed from hand to hand like treasure. But most of all, you remember the flamingos, bright, absurd, fleeting. The city's appetite may shift again tomorrow. Another dish, another performance, another name to whisper with awe. But tonight it's just you, and the memory of flavors that told stories, and the comfort of a full belly after a long, strange day. So let your eyes close gently now. Let the marble fade, the garum jars quiet, the laughter dissolve into sleep. You are no longer watching Rome. You are resting within it. The feathers fall, the torches flicker, and somewhere, not far from here, someone is stirring a pot of barley, humming a lullaby to the rhythm of sleep. You're safe. You're warm. You've tasted a ridiculous little tongue from history and lived to tell the tale. Rest now. The story can wait.